I'll start by introducing myself. So good afternoon, welcome to everybody, and thank you for attending today. My name is Shane Hembrow. For those of you that don't know me, I work for Wales and West Housing, and I'm also the chair of the board of trustees of Shelter Cymru, and I'm the chair of the webinar today. For some years, we, as in Wales and West Housing, have been working on reducing the number of evictions for any reason from our stock. And in the last few years, we've been really pleased that we've got that down to almost all figures, which as a large landlord with some 12,000 homes has been quite a challenge. I've been really enthusiastic about the research that has been commissioned by the Oak Foundation and carried out by Shelter Cymru, that Clwyd, Alyn and ourselves were involved in, so we could really learn more about what can be done, and particularly what we can learn from across different sectors and different organisations about the best practice that already exists. So it is very much a warm welcome from me as we're going to learn more today. And I've been asked to let you know that we will be recording the webinar this afternoon for those that can't be here and want to listen at another time. So it is being recorded. This is the second in a series of webinars that Shelter Cymru have run, and they've coordinated this project, looking at ending evictions into homelessness from social housing in particular. This afternoon, we're going to hear findings from the research project that has been carried out, so research findings so far, as well as some of the suggested models for progressing towards that zero evictions into homelessness goal that we all aspire to. We'll also be hearing some examples of practice from across Wales, and a panel debate about the next steps that we can take will finish us off today. The report, which is being launched today, is available via a link, so you should have already seen that in the chat function, and that will also be shared on Shelter Cymru's Twitter feed and will be emailed to delegates after the webinar has finished today. I would like to specifically thank the Oak Foundation who have sponsored this project. It's certainly true that without their support and their financing of this, that I don't think this work would have happened quite in this way. And I think we'd be in a much more difficult situation in trying to generate the positive change and sort of working together approach to promote the best practice in Wales that hopefully we will capture as a result of this research and this webinar today. We've got some presentations, as I said, and there'll be a short space for questions after each of the speakers that we've got. Please type your questions into the Q&A. Certainly at the bottom of your screen, you may be used to seeing the chat function. There's a Q&A button there, so please put questions in throughout this in the Q&A section, and we can pick them up. If you put them in the chat function, don't worry, we'll monitor both and make sure that we pick up your questions one way or another. But if you try and put them in the Q&A, then we can monitor those as best we can throughout the presentations and the panel debate. Without further ado, as it were, then I'd like to introduce the people that have led on this research, which is Jenny Bibbings and Paul Bevan. They're the next speakers to come on. So if I could just introduce Jenny and Paul. Jenny has worked in policy and campaigning for nearly 20 years, prior to which she was a senior reporter on a national Welsh newspaper. And she's been with Shelter Cymru for 10 years and is the head of campaigns. Paul has worked in homelessness and supported housing for over 35 years. For the last 2 years, he has worked on his policy and research team, which has included writing reports on homelessness people's views, on ways to end homelessness, former tenant arrears, and the allocation of social housing, in particular in Swansea. So I'll pass over to Jenny now. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Shane. Pnawn da, bawb. So I wanted to begin by just giving you some background about this project and how it came about. So the report that you're going to be hearing about today is really the culmination of quite a number of work from us at Shelter Cymru. So back in 2014, we set ourselves the challenge of generating a debate, a national debate about the role that social housing has to play in preventing homelessness. And we produced a report in 2015 called Accessing and Sustaining Social Tenancies, which you can see on our website. So back then for us at Shelter Cymru, it was very much about drawing attention to work as we saw it. We wanted to produce a piece of work that gave the perspective of tenants who were being evicted into homelessness. So we interviewed a number of tenants. We showed the human impacts of homelessness. We showed actually how difficult it was for people to move on from homelessness once they had been evicted. So of the tenants who we interviewed, more than 3/4 of them were still homeless 6 months after their social tenancy. We also wanted to talk about the wider impacts on the system. So we worked with some independent consultants and we did a cost analysis, which showed that the evictions from social housing were costing the Welsh economy something like 24.3 million a year. And they were also costing social landlords themselves in the region of 7.8 million pounds a year. So we asked some questions there about best use of funds. So we put that out there. It went, as you can imagine, like a lead balloon, and there was some robust conversations off the back of that piece of work. But one person who felt strongly that we needed to take this further was the housing minister at the time, Carl Sargent. So Carl, he asked his civil servants to set up a working group, which we all took part in. We looked at the recommendations and we took the debate forward. So as I say, it was a very robust debate at times, but really constructive. And of course, as well as Carl's support, it's also been very much enabled by our current minister, Julie James MS, as someone who's come into office. Having been raised in social housing, she feels really strongly about social housing and making the sector the best it can possibly be. So it was in conversations between Julie and our former director, John Pusey, that John began talking to Julie about this idea of ending evictions into homelessness from social housing. And as we know, Julie took this on very passionately. It's a hugely, hugely ambitious agenda. And there's nothing being done quite like it anywhere else in the world, as far as we know. So Wales at this point is really unique on the world stage in taking quite this approach to social housing and homelessness prevention. So we're in a really interesting place at the moment. And I would just like to take a moment just to pay tribute to John's vision and his thought leadership, which has brought us where we are today. I had the pleasure and privilege of working with John for 10 years. And I've seen the impact that his leadership has made both now and into the future as well, pieces of work like this. So from Shelter Cymru's perspective, I think having looked at the change in the sector over the last few years, we've been blown away really, and so impressed with the commitment and the spirit with which the sector has taken this challenge on. And we've seen the impact of it already. We've seen it in our casework. We've also seen it in possession stats across Wales as a whole. So just before lockdown back in March 2019, the possession stats show nearly 40% reduction in possession actions from Welsh social landlords in the space of a year. Now that's huge, and and we have to be fully aware of the tremendous effort that has gone behind that, the culture change, the innovative practice, but I think most importantly of all, it's the compassionate practice that will lie behind a huge gain like that. So I think at this stage now, it's a very exciting time, and there's a great sense of possibility about where we go next. And that's what this report is about. It's about where we go next. So I think at Shelter Cymru, we recognise that the ball's in our court with this. We started this one off. So it's our responsibility to flesh it out and to develop our understanding together, working together to understand what ending evictions into homelessness actually means in practice. So we've been working, as Shane says, we've been working with Wales and West and Clwyd Alyn housing associations. We've worked with the WLGA, Community Housing Cymru, and of course our partners and funders, Oak Foundation, on this report, which you'll be hearing about today. And I think at that point, I will hand over to my colleague, Paul Bevan, who will take you through the report findings.
Oh, well, thank you, Jenny. I'm Paul Bevan, and I'm going to talk to you about working together to end homelessness from social housing. new research that my colleague Sarah Powell and I undertook at the end of 2020 and early 2021. So Jenny's given some context to the work. In addition, the Welsh Government's current 5-year rent settlement to social landlords included that they strengthen their approaches to eliminate evictions into homelessness. And one of the Homelessness Action Group's recommendations is that homelessness is not just a housing issue, it needs a cross-public services response. There were 3 elements to the research methodology. The first element was undertaken by Sarah, who talked to 6 tenants of Clwyd, Alyn and Wales and West housing associations whose tenancies were or had been at serious risk. Sarah tried to contact 16 tenants but found it very difficult getting hold of people, which is something landlords also found. The second element was desktop research into tenancy sustainment, and the third element was interviews with 18 organisations, social landlords, local authorities and support providers. We want to say a big thank you to everyone who helped with the research. Some common themes came from the findings, which have been brought together under 6 principles, each with practice examples. I'm going to talk about these, and then Jenny will talk about a tentative model to end homelessness from social housing. So the 6 principles: create the right culture, prevention and early intervention, person-centred, not process-driven, work in partnership, that's internally and externally, fully utilise homelessness prevention initiatives, and persevere and continue trying to help. These are not surprising or new, but we hope they will be a useful reminder in one place, and in particular, that the examples under each of those principles may be of use. So firstly, principle 1, create the right culture. We were frequently told that the values and culture of organisations determine the approach taken by staff. A leadership culture that emphasises ending homelessness and social housing should lead to a mindset and ways of working and actions that strive to meet this intention. Here are some examples. Clwyd Alyn Housing Association is going through cultural change based on its mission of together to beat poverty. In practical terms, this has meant, for example, developing a social enterprise to address food poverty, grants to relieve financial hardship, a team that provides support and information about benefits, and an intention to evict no one. During 2019 to 20, there were 4 evictions, none of which were into homelessness. Valleys to Coast customer accounts team used to contact people in rent arrears using standardised letters containing more serious messages as the arrears rose. Over about 18 months, the culture changed to be much more supportive and talking face-to-face or on the phone. What they found is that rent arrears have reduced over this period. Principle 2 is prevention and early intervention. Some people told us that social landlords and support providers should offer people earlier pre-tenancy support to help them prepare properly to be a tenant in order to prevent homelessness later on. The need to ensure that the property allocation is right for the individual was also emphasised strongly. Many people talked about the difficulties that some tenants face in furnishing their homes and affording floor coverings, fundamental to moving into a new home. Few social landlords offer furnished tenancies or provide floor coverings in Wales. We were frequently told that early contact to resolve issues is an essential and key aspect of preventing homelessness, by getting to know tenants early on and not letting issues get to a crisis point. Here are a couple of examples. Flintshire Council's housing intervention team involves the income and tenancy support teams discussing tenants with rent arrears of below £600. They find that tenants are generally willing to have contact when arrears are relatively low, but less likely when they owe thousands of pounds and feel that repayment is unattainable. This early contact has resulted in almost 3/4 of cases ending in positive outcomes. South Yorkshire Housing Association's evictions have reduced from 50 in 2014-15 to 9 in 2019-20, using a range of early intervention and prevention methods, such as offering some furnished tenancies and paying for some removal fees, providing energy advice, providing money advice, and also funding an independent debt service, helping people to get online and improve their digital skills, mediation training for all neighbourhood staff, signposting people to their own and other agencies' support services. Principle 3, person-centred, not process-driven. We were frequently told of the need to get to know tenants, build rapport and trust, keep communication open, treat people well, be flexible. We've summarised what we were told into this one principle of being person-centred, not process-driven. During Sarah's conversations with tenants, she found that most didn't initially want to talk about their housing situation. Their main concerns were totally different, such as children being taken into care, mental and physical health problems, poverty, family separation, bereavement. This reinforced the need to take a trauma-informed approach to understand wider difficulties and traumas. Some tenants may need support and understanding for these issues before being able to address their tenancy problems. Staff told us that building and keeping trusting relationships with tenants from the start was a key factor in helping resolve difficulties early, as well as when tenancies are at risk. We found that there was a need for clear, personalised and honest communication. One person, for example, was £3,000 in arrears and had been served a notice of seeking possession, but said she hadn't understood what this meant and hadn't realised her arrears were that high. She was very complimentary of the way her landlord had treated her, but hadn't realised her tenancy was at serious risk. Wales and West focus on what matters to each tenant. People who are struggling are offered support using an outcome star, which enables them to see changes in aspects of their situation over time, such as reduced rent arrears, as people manage their finances more effectively. Bromford Housing Association changed from having housing officers to having generic neighbourhood coaches with small patches of 175 to 200 homes. The intention was that they get to know each tenant, as well as the services in the area, and they connect people to those services. Bromford has found that tenants who know their neighbourhood coach are less likely to be in arrears or to cause antisocial behaviour, and found that rent arrears overall have again fallen. Many people told us of the importance of working in partnership with colleagues, both internally and externally. A routine maintenance visit, for example, could be an opportunity for the housing officer to accompany a maintenance worker to speak with a tenant. Effective partnership work with external organisations can limit duplication of effort and enable coordinated planning and a more cohesive service for tenants. We heard of strategic partnerships, which were agreeing common approaches, sharing good practice, developing relationships with one area or across regions. A couple of examples. Monmouthshire County Council's Housing Intervention Panel is a very wide multi-agency forum that meets every 2 weeks to coordinate support to prevent homelessness and to help people who are struggling. The panel tries to increase the number of people receiving the right service first time and ensure that people get a coordinated response. Bronavon and Torfaen Council have initiated an Ending Evictions into Homelessness strategic partnership of RSLs, Torfaen Council, the Health Board, Public Health Wales, Department of Work and Pensions, and third sector organisations. The group is considering adopting the Homes for Cathy English Housing Association commitments to end homelessness. Principle 5 is fully utilised homelessness prevention initiatives. Some people whose tenancies were at risk said they had no or little support. Most organisations said that they knew of support providers, although some did admit they needed to improve their knowledge. In work to prevent homelessness, it's essential that social landlords are aware of the support services and resources in their area so that they can assist tenants to access them if they wish. One example of an effective support service is Pobble's Family Intervention and Prevention Project, or FIP. You'll hear more about this in a few moments from Karen from Pobble. Providers also told us of the need to maximise the use of resources to prevent homelessness, such as accessing discretionary housing payments, homelessness prevention funds, rent rescue, debt relief orders, hardship funds, grants, etc. And then finally, Principle 6, persevere and continue trying to help. Don't give up. We found that many landlords face difficulties preventing homelessness or evictions when there has been prolonged non-contact between landlords and tenants despite many creative attempts. Many people talked about how to contact tenants, such as obtaining consent to contact family and friends, using people's preferred communication methods, contacting people at different times of the day and evening, speaking to neighbours, etc. It is important to not give up trying, but not harassing tenants, of course. We found that some landlords offer people managed moves or transfers to more affordable homes to prevent debt, and some examples of people who are displaying antisocial behaviour being offered a different home to make a new start to avoid homelessness. We heard that in Port Talbot, Cardiff and North East Wales, landlords are starting to consider managed moves between themselves as a way of saving people's tenancies. So that was a very quick run through the 6 principles. There are more case examples in the report and examples of organisational practice if you feel you'd like to look at those in more detail. Jenny will now talk about some tentative models stemming from the findings.
I am now going to attempt to share my screen, and I'm going to take you through the model. Okay, just bear with me one moment. I hope you can all see that. So before I go into this, I just wanted to explain a little bit to you about the rationale. There are actually 3 models that I'm going to talk you through, okay? And the reason why there are 3, that they're broadly sequential, and we've done this because there's a number of reasons, because we recognise that not everybody is at the same stage in the journey, and different providers have got very different structures in place. Some providers in Wales are already achieving zero evictions into homelessness, or near enough anyway, while others are a little bit further away. So we need to build in and account for that variation. So when you look at these 3 models, you should be able to look across them and see where you are in the journey. Okay. So that's the one reason. The other reason why we've made 3 models is because we recognise that there isn't a complete blueprint at this point for this is how you end evictions into homelessness, because the practice is so new and so tentative. So there are gaps in the evidence base in places, and you'll see as we go through this model, you will see where we have pointed out where additional testing and evaluation needs to take place, where we need to build the evidence base up. We've also pointed out where there need to be external enablers. So this is recognising the fact that landlords can't do all of this by themselves, right? And we need the Welsh Government to create that favourable environment in terms of funding and in terms of the legislative framework as well. There's a lot that needs to happen that landlords don't have control over, right? So we've also factor D throughout especially in the intermediate model, where those external enablers have been identified. And I think the last thing I wanted to say before I talk to you in a bit more detail about these models is that this is quite tentative in places, and it has to be that way because, as I say, the practice is so new, and it will change. This is where we are at this stage, and I think that's the best that we can do. But we're very much looking forward to hearing your reactions to it and to hear kind of how things change as this perhaps gets embedded in local contexts. Different local areas or regions could take this model and make it their own, and it might look quite different, and we're comfortable with that. So there you go. With those caveats in mind, I'm going to see if I can zoom in a little bit on this model because the writing is quite small. I'm not having very much luck zooming in at the moment, which is just typical, isn't it? Okay. Oh, there we go. No, we are zooming in. Excellent. Okay. So as you can see, this model is based on the typology of homelessness prevention, which is very widely used now. And it's a really useful way of thinking about prevention because you are able to identify where your different interventions sit in terms of the general upstreaming of homelessness prevention that we want to see take place. And that's a really important point with these models, is throughout the models, starting with the very first one that we're looking at now and going all the way through to the final model, we're looking to push our interventions upstream, okay? So the initial model, even though this is made up of actions that can be taken now, and that's what people told us they wanted, was a whole load of ideas for things that you can take away and run with today, right? So that's what we've got here. But even in this early model, we are looking to upstream our interventions so that we are preventing the need for emergency interventions as a result of evictions from social housing, okay? And as we go through the models, we will be pushing our interventions up further so that by the time we reach the model, all of our interventions are either universal or targeted. We will also be seeking to eliminate crisis interventions. Okay, so that's an important kind of guiding principle for these models. So if I just zoom in now and scoot across to here, I'm going to talk quickly through the typology. So starting with universal. The evidence base here is really strong, and it's all the stuff that Paul was just talking about. There's a load of good practice around getting the relationship right with the tenant from the outset and building the strongest foundation that you possibly can. I'm not going to dwell on that because, as I say, you can look to the report and you can see lots of detail and lots of specific examples. Moving across to targeted. So interventions under here are characterized by perhaps a tenancy is showing some early signs of difficulty. There are that need addressing, but at this stage, you're not looking to start formal possession proceedings, okay? You're looking to get alongside tenants. And this was the work that Paul and Sarah did with tenants who are in serious rent arrears right now. This work was really illuminating in the sense of helping us to understand from the tenant's perspective, where do their rent arrears sit alongside all of the other challenges that they are facing in their lives at this moment. And if you can understand that and get into the tenant's perspective, then that's going to help you to work with the tenant in a way that suits them. So this is all about perseverance and personalization. We have recommended in the report, there are a number of alternatives to a NOSP, to a notice seeking possession, which you might like to consider. The trouble with issuing a notice seeking possession as a way of getting engagement is that it's only partially successful. And for every tenant who does and take notice, there's another who's going to be put off by that and is going to practice avoidance tactics. So we are suggesting that there are other ways in which you can communicate honestly with the tenant about the gravity of the situation, definitely, and let them know about the possible consequences, absolutely, but perhaps not doing that in a way that starts a ball rolling that may end up with a formal possession. So I will refer you to the report and have a look at those ideas and those insights, which very much came out of the work that we did with. The other point that I wanted to highlight here before we move on, second bullet from the bottom, ASB, intensive holistic support. So in a moment, or after Paul and I finished, you're going to be hearing from Karen, who's going to talk to you about an example of one of these types of service. The evidence base on intensive holistic support to prevent antisocial behaviour is really strong. There have been services that have been successfully doing this in Wales for years, and the outcomes are so good. And yet we only have a handful of these types of service in Wales. And from our perspective, having looked at the strength of the evidence base, we think every part of Wales should be seriously considering getting intensive holistic support in there to prevent ASB, because you wouldn't believe it, but I will leave that to Karen to explain more. I'm going to scoot across now, and I'm getting conscious of time. I want to talk about crisis for a moment. So dealing with the consequences of system failure. So this is at the point where you, as a provider, may feel that a tenancy can't be saved. Now, of course, the final call as to whether a tenancy can be saved or not doesn't rest with the landlord or with the tenant, does it? It rests with the judiciary. But, you know, let's talk for argument's sake about if a landlord would like to, feels that a tenancy needs to be brought to an end. There are a couple of different routes open to you at this point. Paul talked about the managed move, or what has emerged as being called the managed move approach. There's a few examples in the report, so there is some learning there about how a managed move can be successfully undertaken. We've been fairly conservative, small c conservative, with our recommendations here, because I think from Shelter Cymru's tenant focus point of view, we recognise that consent is really important, and that it needs to be informed consent as well. And the other point here as well is that we think it would not be appropriate to do a managed move at the same time as formal possession proceedings. Welcome views on that, of course, but from our perspective, it seems from Shelter Cymru's casework perspective that it would just force the tenant's hand and place them in a difficult position where they would have to accept no matter what the offer was. As you can see, we've put here that it needs testing and evaluation. The other option open to you, of course, is formal proceedings. And so if you decide to go down that route, we've got a number of protections and mitigations here. And again, the evidence base fully needs testing and evaluation, but these are the kinds of mitigations that we think you might be able to put in place to assure yourself that if you do go through an eviction, that homelessness isn't the outcome of that eviction. So there's a number of recommendations here. One of the recommendations is that you might develop a person-centered plan. What that plan looks like is completely open, because this has all, but it would be a way of you as the provider formalizing your thought processes around the risk of homelessness that might result from this eviction taking place. And there's some suggestions here for the types of mitigations that you might put in place, working with housing options, showing forbearance. So, for example, agreeing not to execute the warrant until some suitable accommodation is available, so that the household doesn't have to go into temporary accommodation, for example. That won't be suitable in every case, but there are some ideas here for you to chew over. And while you're thinking about that, I will move on to the intermediate model. Here we are. Now, conscious of time, so I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail here, but the main things to point out to you at this point is this is where the response becomes more formalized. Your structures are maturing, if you like. This is also where we need the Welsh Government to enabling role. So you can see there's a number of enablers identified here. The move towards a rapid rehousing system is very positive. Obviously, that needs to be supported through guidance and funding. The social house building target. We're also talking, if you look at the targeted box on the left, we're talking about cross-portfolio buy-in. So something which Paul touched on in his presentation, and there's more in the report. There are some promising signs a multi-agency approach to targeted interventions can be particularly effective. Again, it needs testing and evaluation, but there are some early models which are showing some promising findings. Getting that cross-sector buy-in, as we all know, is not easy, and we suggest it would be a lot easier if the Welsh Government were to create that shared public sector prevention duty to prevent homelessness. That would certainly help to get our housing partners to the table. Anyway, so there's more of an emphasis in the intermediate model on that multi-agency working. And I'm just going to nip to the final model now. As you can see, This is a fully mature response. This is the destination, if you will. And we felt it was really important with this that we needed to have the final part of the model to remind us what we're all working towards. You know, that there is a goal in mind, and it's a model where you have early prevention, crisis and emergency is avoided, and over time landlords work to reduce the use of formal possession powers to zero. Okay, so this is, of course, you know, this isn't about achieving all of this by this time next year or anything like that. It's a long-term vision, but we think it's really important to have that in mind, especially when you think that successive housing ministers have been really persuaded by this agenda and want to take it, and we don't know what future administrations might do in the area of legislation. It might not be possible to evict into homelessness in years to come if there's legislative change. So for us, we thought it's important to put this final vision in there, keep this in mind, and you can potentially get ahead of any future legislative changes. So that's a very quick scoop through it, and I appreciate there's a lot to take in here. You will have plenty of time to obviously, you know, to ask questions, and if you take the report away and think about it and things occur to you later, Paul and I would really welcome your emails. We are very happy to continue this conversation, but that's your run through of the model. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you for taking us through the models. And hopefully people heard very much what Jenny said, that this isn't necessarily all of the answers. The model isn't all of the answers, but it's approaches that are part of the solution, and those that are not, potentially, such as a very rapid serving of notices seeking possession. It's not meant as a flow chart either, I don't think, a set of steps. It's more of a set of principles and approaches. But I'm sure there will be lots of comments that we can debate later. Please put your questions in the Q&A, which is surprisingly silent, other than the comment about the sound earlier, but Jenny recovered that. I am mindful of time, so we're running a little bit behind, and I'm going to our next speaker. So I'd like to introduce Karen Barnes. Karen is the area manager for families and young people at the Pobble Group. She's worked for Pobble for 10 years, starting as a caseworker for the Family Intervention and Prevention Project, and a project that she's been lucky enough, I hope these are her words, to see grow and flourish. So thank you, Karen. I'll hand over to you now.
Okay. Thanks, Shane. Okay, so just going to share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that. So yes, hi everybody, as Shane said, I'm Karen and I'm area manager with Pobble Group. Thanks for inviting me to speak at the webinar today, because it's really given me an opportunity to talk to you all about how Pobble prevent homelessness for families. So 10 years ago, we had concerns regarding families becoming homeless due to antisocial behaviour. These concerns were families becoming street homeless, sofa surfing, and the risk that this posed to families and their children. Children being accommodated by the local authority due to homelessness status. Vulnerable families disappearing off the radar with nobody knowing where they've gone, nobody knowing what support they've had. So the decision was made to establish the Family Intervention and Prevention Project, which is a service that offers long-term, intensive, holistic support to families. So to ensure good outcomes for all the families, we support a model of working that was put together with the main aims of keeping families together and preventing homelessness. So our model of working is with a multi-skilled team. So we have different skills that could be youth work, child protection, homelessness, housing, and this considerably reduces the need for ongoing involvement of other services. However, the main effectiveness was demonstrated by the significant change in the direction of our families' futures. We aimed, and we have really good outcomes at preventing their problems escalating, support them to break into generational cycles of behaviour. So what is the FIP project? FIP works with vulnerable single and two-parent families who are often the hardest to reach. And actually, even though it's vulnerable single and two-parent families, we also work with families that are just adults within their home as well. So whoever lives in that home constitutes a family. We concentrate on person-centred family-led recovery, working alongside families to achieve what they see as important. Because when success is defined by families, they feel in control, they're motivated to achieve the goals that they have set. We build meaningful relationships to promote family independence and effective multi-agency working. We couldn't do what we do without multi-agency working. FIP often works as the coordinator of those services around a family. I remember going into one family and somebody had just left, and I just said, "Oh, who was that?" And they were like, "I don't know. There are so many people in and out of my home." Our staff have small caseloads, which allows for a creative and flexible approach towards holistic family support. Families are supported up to 9 hours a week and as long as they need it, and this can be for up to 2 years. Again, this is flexible and dependent on the needs of the family at that time. We are a person-centred service that supports families that have often broken down relationships with many agencies. They're the hardest to reach. We have great success and engagement, and I think this is because we're not a statutory agency, so there is an element of choice involved of families working with us. We have the time, and we also use a psychologically informed approach, being very aware of families' ACEs. So we work with families, we work with the families we support. We don't work at them or to them, it's always with them. Our interventions are tailor-made to meet the needs of the family. So phase 1, this phase will be for approximately 6 weeks. Although we aim to give 10 to 12 hours support per week, that first 2 to 3 weeks is usually a lot more. Phase 2, which is 6 weeks to 4 months. And this is the period where relationships are built with our families, where they start to trust us, and where we really learn the needs of each individual and that family as a whole. But this is often when there's a peak in the need. This is often when there's a crisis, or when you find out, for example, if they've said that, oh no, there's no debt, and then suddenly there's lots of debt that we need to deal with. This model is flexible, which is great, because obviously during phase 2, we often have to go back to phase 1, could be in phase 4, we have to go back to phase 3. So phase 3 is the maintenance phase, and this is really the crucial period. This is a period where families are going it alone. They're out there and really working to maintain the changes that they've made. So this is a time where we really have to be available to ensure that maintenance is kept. Phase 4, so this is the optional phase. So this is a phase where we will call them maybe once a week, maybe twice a week, depending on their needs. And if they can feel themselves slipping backwards, we will go back out and make those visits and deal with whatever crisis they feel they're in at that point, rather than that escalating to something a lot more. So the Housing Act, where does FIP fit in with the Housing Act? So we work to ensure we support families under the objectives of the Housing Wales Act. And these are homelessness. That is the main aim of FIP, is to keep families in their accommodation, to ensure that accommodation is suitable for their needs, and to give support for people who may become homeless or have previously been homeless. They could be in temporary accommodation, to ensure that they have the supports to move on to accommodation that is suitable, or to stay in the accommodation they're in that's suitable. So in particular, as set out in the homelessness strategy, we work with people leaving prison and youth detention. The aim is preventing antisocial behaviour and criminal activity, and we continue to support families if they have been within the prison system and they've been released. We work with young people who've left or leaving care, or parents who have been in the care system. We support families to make changes to stop children and young people being accommodated by the local authority. We've supported people leaving the armed forces, where one or both parents have been in the armed forces. We support people receiving mental health. For many of the families that we support, there is an element of mental ill health. We support them to receive the medical help they need to minimise that and mental health. And this also includes children and young people. We've seen a real escalation in young people and children at the moment, especially through COVID, where the mental health needs are far more complex. So we work with CAMS and other agencies to ensure that the needs for those young people and children are met. So how do we stop families from becoming homeless? We work to explore the reasons surrounding the antisocial behaviour, and that is with families that are both the perpetrators and the targets of antisocial behaviour. In many cases, the causes are domestic abuse, and that's just not domestic abuse between parents or adults, that's often domestic abuse from children towards parents. The normal teenage behaviours, the more complex behaviours, it's misuse, and quite often noise nuisance. We support all our families to address rent arrears, and we do this by supporting them to access payment plans, debt relief orders. We'll support them to apply for DHPs. If there is social services involvement, we will also liaise with social services to see how they can support. FIP are very good at liaising with housing benefit. They've great relationships in the areas, and have that point of access that they can go to start those conversations. All of the FIP family are trained in the Freedom Programme, and that Freedom Programme is for our team to work with women, children, teenagers, and also the perpetrators of domestic abuse. We also support to access substance misuse services and support for mental and physical health. So we work with families individually and as a whole. So each member of that family, no matter how little they are, will have their own support plan. That support plan is a positive support plan. It's looking at what they're good at, what their skills are, and how we can use those skills to move forward. We will support the families through social services. FIP are very honest and open and transparent with their families. They will actually, if they would have to put into a multi-agency referral, for example, they would speak to the family about that before that referral was put in, as long as it was safe to do so. They support them to attend meetings and conferences. Sometimes they're their voice until that family have the confidence to be able to speak for themselves. A lot of that we have when we first go into family homes, home management and home maintenance are the first thing we deal with. If we can support parents and families to bring the maintenance of their property up to a place where it's a nice place to live, that often boosts that family and that person. We'll work with family to set up daily routines. So if that means we go in and support with breakfast routines or tea time routines or bedtimes, that will happen. We support regular school attendance, and we'll support children in the school setting. That doesn't always mean that you would go into a classroom. I can't imagine any 13-year-old wanting me to go in and sit next to them, but we will be their voice and we will support them in meetings that are about them. We work with families on parenting skills and family relationships. As I said previously, there is an escalation in domestic abuse that we've seen from children to parents. So we work the causes of that and how we can make those changes with the family. We work with families to build confidence and self-esteem, and we will give them advice on employment and training. So community cohesion. FIP support families become part of their community, giving them an acceptance and a support network that they didn't previously have. We encourage all the families to join in activities to prevent isolation. We will support the families to attend. We will go with them until they're confident to attend alone. We put on our own activities where our families can meet parties and visits to local farms or to the park. And we've even had opportunities to be able to take families away for a weekend together. So being part of the community is especially important for families. We work with so many families that are socially isolated and they have no family support. When there is criminal activity in a family or antisocial behaviour, this is absolutely magnified. So when needed, we will support families to move to another area. However, that really is only in extreme cases, as the focus is on fixing those issues, not moving the issue to somewhere else. Monmouthshire Housing have reported that 78 antisocial behaviour cases involving families in 2019-20, and there's been 97 cases since March 20, and these stats are only families that were the alleged cause of antisocial behaviour. This doesn't include those families that are targeted by antisocial behaviour. So when FIP work with a number of families in the same community where there's antisocial behaviour, this has a positive effect on the whole community. Gang culture is reduced. We worked within one small community where there was a gang of teenagers who were running riots, climbing on roofs. They were harassing shopkeepers. That then escalated to these young people drug running for dealers in the area. We were able to work with 4 families out of that community, out of that gang, giving the parents the ability to give the boundaries that those young people really needed at that time. And it really worked. That then stopped. And that left the whole community feeling safer. You know, people could go into that little shopping centre and not feel harassed because there was a big gang of young people, stood outside that shop saying things as they were walking in. Children and young people then attend education if there is nothing for them to do. If they're not in that town centre, they go back to education with support, and the adults work towards employment. Many of the young people and adults we work with are not in education or employment. This is often due to low confidence, low self-esteem, a lack of education, and for a lot of our young people, because there have been many exclusions from schools. We work on the positive skills they have, and we guide them with their parent support to meet their skill base. So as I said, FIP has now been here for 10 years. It was 10 years in November, and we have had some amazing outcomes. Up until November 2020, we supported over 300 families. 100% of the families retained their tenancies and were supported to live in appropriate properties. 100% of families in temporary accommodation have all moved on to long-term appropriate accommodation. 100% of our families have been supported to either stop or minimise antisocial behaviour. 100% of families have accessed the financial support they need, and 100% of people have accessed support for mental health and have been supported to also maintain their physical well-being. 97% of families have stayed together. And the reason why that's 97% is that there are times when it's not safe for children to be in the homes, and obviously their safety is paramount. So legislation, how does FIP fit with Welsh legislation? So the Wales Poverty Strategy, we cover all areas of this strategy. Although our referrals are primarily housing related support due to antisocial behaviour, to get to the heart of the reasons behind the antisocial behaviour, to make significant lasting changes, we work with the families to improve their lives. The Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So the existing family intervention and prevention project has been in place for 10 years, and it has grown over time by working with commissioning bodies in Gwent and demonstrating those positive outcomes that have been achieved. So already showing the sustainability of the service and the support and the great outcomes that families have had. Social Services and Wellbeing Act. The FIP service is both a prevention and an intervention service. So although we often work with families, we do prevent further escalation, and we do work with families to break those generational cycles of behaviour. We work with all families. It's a holistic approach. We work with them as a whole and as individuals. So we just make sure that they are always at the centre of their support. We work with local authorities while supporting the family through social services processes. Any support plans that our families have always incorporate plans of other agencies that have an impact on our families. All families have the opportunity to be involved in the delivery of services, and we really ensure that their voices are heard. At Pobl, we undertake annual surveys just to ensure the service we offer is the best it could be, and we action anything that is needed, but we do that with our families and with our young people and children. As I said earlier, quite often, where there are antisocial behaviour concerns, there is also domestic abuse between adult relationships and child to parent, and we have seen a rise in this since COVID. Our teams, I said, are carried out to carry the Freedom Programme individually, but also within a group setting, so we can bring parents together who are all, within a family where there is domestic abuse. And we've also started undertaking training in NVR, non-violent resistance. So this is a parenting skill, I suppose, that ensures that parents have the tools and the techniques to support their children and their young people who display challenging attitudes and behaviours, but in a way that is non-threatening. Thank you. I think that's it from me.
Thank you, Karen. I'm sure I get the sense from a couple of the points that have been made, just how impressive your presentation was and the work that you're doing. Particularly for me was the focus around the individuals, and I like the point around smaller caseloads, giving people plenty of time when they needed it, and that came over. I was certainly really impressed. We've had a couple of questions that have come up in the Q&A. If I can just raise one of them. Somebody talked a bit about what local authority areas you covered and the size of the team, size of caseload, perhaps a little bit about that and the sort of funding for that might be useful.
Yeah, absolutely. At the moment, we are mainly funded by HSG with some funding from Monmouthshire Housing Association. Our caseloads are very low, so generally we will have between 5 and 8 cases per caseworker. That obviously will fluctuate depending on need. So if you've got somebody who is in phase 4, you're ready to take on somebody in phase 1. So that can, you know, fluctuate and go up and down. At the moment, we are currently in Gwent. We are in Blaenau Gwent, Newport, Monmouthshire, but we also receive funding from Pobl Homes and Communities. So that means we can work in any area where there is a Pobl Homes and Communities property.
Right, I see. Thank you, Karen. I think actually we could ask you lots of questions and lots of information, but I'm going to move us to the panel debate, and so you're part of that. So,
okay.
I think there are a couple of other questions in the Q&A that perhaps you could answer while we're getting into the panel and we're hearing from the other panelists.
No problem.
Into the chat, that'd be really good of you, Karen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I am going to move us into the panel debate, which is our last session for the afternoon. So I'd like to start by introducing the panel to you. So first we have up is Cheryl Emery from Rhondda Cynon Taf County Borough Council, where she's the Supporting People and Housing Options Manager. Next, we have Amelia John from the Welsh Government, and where she is the Deputy Director of Housing and Regeneration. And then we have Joy Kent, who is the Chair of Cynon Taf Community Housing Group and works as an independent consultant. And we will also be joined by our speakers that we've had this afternoon, Jenny, Paul and Karen, who we just heard from. So to start this session, I'm going to ask Cheryl, Amelia and Joy to introduce themselves and for those to speak for 10 minutes, giving sort of their perspective on the issues that we're talking about this afternoon. They're going to speak for about 10 minutes each. Please, I want to remind you that if you've got any questions that come up during our panelists speaking, pop them into the Q&A so that we can have a lively debate afterwards. So if we can start, I'm going to start with Cheryl and hand over to you now, Cheryl.
Okay, thank you very much, Shane. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for inviting me today. It's certainly been a very interesting session so far. I'm not sure my 10 minutes is going to say much more than everybody's already said, and certainly what Jenny has covered. But I just want to say, from my local authority perspective and my role really in covering both housing support grant commissioning of services and homelessness, I know that no one wants to evict tenants, and I know that for many of our RSLs, that certainly is the last resort. You know, we certainly understand the impact that this has on the clients when it happens, on the RSL itself, and certainly on a homelessness service. To have a family present having been evicted is quite a big issue and quite a big challenge for us in terms of placing and providing the right support. So I just want to start by saying how really, and I think really that, you know, in dealing with some of the clients that do present often through this route, many of them have very, very many complex needs and often challenges that we know that if we don't deal with them, we just basically house them and basically the problem doesn't go away for them. So I just want to start by saying that. In terms of listening to some of the presentations, it doesn't do away, and I noticed the model by Jenny, and that is certainly something that I will definitely take away and look to implement as soon as we can, but it doesn't do away with many of the challenges that we currently face at the moment. You know, it's not easy, despite all the services being in place and certainly having excellent projects like Karen. We still have a cohort of people that we really, really need to reach out to as part of this process. So it does require client engagement, which we know is the biggie, in particularly in dealing with perhaps some of our more complex, challenging single people. I want to add as well, in some cases, particularly evictions can be low, but it's those complexities that kind of compound the issue, particularly when they are repeat applications, and we know that we're not really dealing with the fundamental issues of why that individual has been, if you like, evicted. So it is really about the impact that this has on homelessness services as well when this happens. And often, as Jenny's mentioned earlier, it is around crisis intervention. Despite many months of planning and knowing this is going to happen, it often just lands on your door and you're having to deal with things very quickly, and often, as we know in homelessness services, on a Friday afternoon. So it's that kind of stuff that I think we need to look at despite the model. The challenges remain around affordability. We don't fully know the impact of COVID and what that is going to throw with us, particularly when the eviction ban ends. We know that there are increasing rents. We know that utilities are increasing. We know that council tax is increasing. We know that poverty is increasing. We know that debt is increasing. So all those challenges are in the mix as we try to work around this kind of issue, if you like. About increasing levels of unemployment, increasing levels of rent arrears, as I mentioned earlier. We're still not clear on the impact of what that looks like yet. So there's quite a lot of things in the mix that I still think we need to unpick as part of this process, and they are significant challenges that, despite support, affordability and being able to afford where you live is quite a fundamental factor in all of this. I also want to say we've got to get over the culture of blame, and I totally pick up on that. This judgment call that every time we deal with a situation that it must be their fault because we paid the arrears off once, so why are they coming back again? So I guess there's quite a lot of things that remain for me, despite the model, that remain challenges for us to overcome. Not that they can't be overcome, but there's still challenges I think that we need to address. So in terms of how do we avoid no evictions into homelessness, despite the affordability issues and financial implications, I do think that the right services at the right time is key. And some of us know that when we use pilots and models, when you get that right, the outcomes are phenomenal. But nevertheless, we still have to have the right support in place at the right time. Working together to prevent homelessness is absolutely key. Building a system where no one becomes homeless following eviction cannot be achieved by landlords and the local authority housing option services on their own. This has to be a very wide range of support services that come together, and that includes local authority, adult social care departments, it incorporates citizens advice, it incorporates mental health. So there's quite a wide range of services I think that we still need to get together in order to achieve the outcome that we're trying to achieve, despite the model that Jenny's just presented, really. And I think, really, for me, it is just about best practice. If we're going to introduce this, then all RSLs have to sign up to it. It's no good having, one RSL saying, well, we really offer best practice. It really has to be an across-the-board situation where Alyn and locality is signed up to this model. Early intervention and prevention absolutely is key, ensuring that support arrangements are in place, a tenancy sign up. We often know that sometimes that's assumed to have happened, so that there must be safeguards in place to ensure that that has happened at a very early stage. Often, maximising income, again, sometimes we assume that's been done, but again, as part of a tenancy checklist, that really needs to be quite a fundamental part of everything we do around tenancy sign up. And I think the other thing for me, not just because I manage homelessness services, but because I manage support services, is these early triggers. We know cases that perhaps, or households where we know that this could be a significant risk. So why are we not targeting resources particularly at those particular households? And I know we do that, but it just depends how we, if you like, enforce that and make sure it happens. And the other thing, I know this is something that we've been piloting RCT, and I take on board Karen's service, which is phenomenal, and I wish we had one. The low-level ongoing support plays its part as well, having a service that keeps a little eye, particularly on perhaps clients with a mental health need or lower support needs in some cases, but just making sure that we are there when they need to fill in forms, they do everything that they need to do, in order just to make sure that arrears don't accumulate or that they don't get into debt in any other way. So those are some of the things I think are really fundamental, as is communication. You know, we all assume that everybody's doing something, so it's just about making that is in place, and we have really robust protocols to try and resolve some of these issues. And again, allocation policies, you know, are we sometimes being a little too rigid when actually, you know, just paying off a little bit of debt because we can allow somebody to move, freeze up, if you like, that situation and can sometimes resolve that situation. So I guess there's a lot of things in there, isn't it? Communication, culture, and that everything's in place, having quite robust pathways, really. So yeah, that's just my thoughts.
Thank you, Cheryl. That's excellent, and some particular points in there that I hope we get to debate a little bit more in the panel, particularly around allocations and affordability. But if I can now pass over to Amelia from Welsh Government, if we could hear from you now, please.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. Thank you, Shane. So Prynawn da, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity for being here webinar. Found it really, really fascinating and quite inspiring, actually. Can I firstly say how much I welcome the report? It doesn't pretend ending homelessness from social housing is easy, but I think it really crystallises the issues and offers practical pathways for social landlords to support tenants to avoid homelessness. So I think that's excellent. It also provides some really, really good case studies and good practice examples. And obviously Karen has been through some of those, and I've already sent some of those good practice examples around colleagues. You will all is absolutely committed to this agenda, and that she has emphasised the transformation she wants to see in homelessness services. So the goal, of course, is preventing and eventually ending homelessness altogether. So that was set out in the strategy in October 2019. And to come back to Jenny's point, rapid rehousing is absolutely at the heart of that approach, and we will be providing guidance on what that means and how that can be delivered. As you will know, ending homelessness is not going to be quick, it's not going to be easy, but that absolutely is our goal. And in the make sure that homelessness is rare, brief and unrepeated. And we've had the privilege of having a homelessness action group and reports and recommendations. We're going to draw on those, and they will underpin our approach to preventing and ending homelessness in Wales. That group has come to an end. We're now establishing a Housing Support National Advisory Board. They'll work with us, they'll help us develop and deliver our action plan. There's a real diversity of voice on that board, and I'm sure they will give us constructive challenge and hold us to account. And just to say that there has been a huge commitment in terms of 40 million extra in the housing support grant, 4 million the homelessness prevention grant, really major increase to the supported housing grant. So I think all of that's really excellent. And I know that the pandemic has been absolutely awful in so many ways for so many people, but it has, one thing it has done is given us an opportunity to accelerate progress on homelessness. So we can build on the fantastic work. I know many of you will have been involved in this to try to bring everybody in. So we brought in well over 7,000 people in the last facing homelessness or homeless. The multi-agency work and partnership work has been absolutely fantastic. It's shown that the only way to effectively respond to a crisis situation is to work together. And I think it's just really important that we translate that partnership working into everyday work to prevent and end homelessness. I think that's absolutely key. So people have said this far more articulately than me in this session, but let me just really briefly focus on 4 areas, and actually they echo elements of the report. So that's culture, partnership working, prevention, and being person-centred. So in terms of culture, I think there's a massive role for leaders within organisations to frame the message of ending homelessness from social housing and make the case of why it's needed and why working. Obviously, I would absolutely accept that there is also a real leadership role for Welsh Government, and I hope that's been clear in terms of the messages that we've been giving, and certainly the Minister's been very clear. We want to build on the principles that social landlords and CHC produced on ending evictions into homelessness, and the excellent examples that we heard today. We want to move away from this sense, and we've talked about it already, of deserving and non-deserving, so that mind shift that recognises the trauma that people are likely to have faced that may have led to potential mental health, substance misuse, ASB, etc. And I guess that real sense that everybody has a right to be treated with dignity and respect. And just doing that can make a huge difference to people's sense of taking control of their lives. And then other people have touched on this already. Trauma-informed practice is so important. So many tenants facing homelessness have experienced trauma and abuse, and just really important that people working with them are trained to understand and respond appropriately. So secondly, partnership working. I mean, I just could not agree more that all public services have got to take ownership of this issue. Homelessness is not just a housing issue. It's not just for social landlords. It's about mental health, substance misuse, education, so many more services working in partnership. And I think one of the things that COVID's done is really emphasise that home is central to people's life in every way, to their education, employment chances, family life, just every aspect of their lives. So that, again, is something I think we can build on. And then I just wanted to say also the role of the third sector. I mean, that too has been so massively emphasised throughout the pandemic, and it's a chance for us to really reflect on that. So thirdly, prevention. And it's funny, isn't it? Because we all know how important early intervention and prevention is, but it seems so difficult to achieve. And yet it's absolutely essential if we're going to avoid poverty, inequality and disadvantage. And I think the report shows this so clearly. It's so much better to intervene early to avoid things spiralling out of control. And I thought there's some excellent examples of proactive outreach when somebody falls into arrears. So as soon as they do, rather than waiting, because they're so much more likely to be amenable to help and support ahead of things becoming overwhelming. And many years ago, I worked as a lawyer in a law centre, and I would really endorse that people, at the point it becomes completely overwhelming, people are just almost paralysed with fear and can't then respond. I can't be made that point about making it being really persistent, using trusted partners, families and friends, phoning. I really like the idea in the report of not sending out standard official letters, because again, that can be really frightening for people. So sending it in a different colour envelope and having really user-friendly language, accessible language that people can understand. And then also, obviously, a multi-agency partnership approach to make sure we get that join up, because and other people have covered this, debt advice, income maximisation, family mediation, all of this is so important for people to take control of their lives. So finally, I just want the point about all services have to be person-centred. So those interventions have to happen at the right time, at the right place, as Cheryl's just said. People have obviously got complex lives with different needs. And we need to all work together and organisations together so they don't fall between the cracks and feel that they're being passed from pillar to post. And I thought FIP was a great example of that. Just to touch quickly on equalities issues, Black, Asian, minority ethnic people may well be experiencing racial harassment, racism, inequality. Black Lives Matter has shone a light on that. We'll be publishing its Race Equality Action Plan for consultation next week, so keep an eye out for that. You won't be surprised to hear it's got a lot on housing in there. And also for social landlords around culture, leadership, representation, service provision and tenant voice. And also, obviously, we really need to be thinking about the needs and experiences of other underrepresented and marginalised groups as well. Much more likely, for example, to be experiencing harassment. I think that point in terms of being person-centred about early contact, so asking tenants early on, how do they want to be contacted? Because that early intervention just avoids a situation that any of us would fall into, of burying our heads in the sand when things become just too overwhelming. And then finally, on being person-centred, that sense of being also preventative and working in partnership, I thought the ideas around management would be interesting. So working together to support tenants to address rent arrears, ASB, and moving people to a different area or property where they might be more likely to thrive. So I'll draw to a close there, but I just wanted to say, in terms of legal duties, and it was really good, I think Karen sort of touched on this, and I am biased because I was a Senior Responsible Officer for the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, as it went through the last 2 years of the Senate. But actually, this is very much about a Wellbeing of Future Generations Act approach and applying the duties we all, as public sector bodies, or those of us who are public sector, legal duty to be complying with the 5 ways of working. So that is working long-term, preventative, taking an integrated approach around health, education, housing, etc., being collaborative and involving people. And that is our legal duty, and we can be held to account for that. So I think if we can do that and really use this report, we can make a massive difference and work towards preventing and ending homelessness actually across all sectors, not just across social landlords.
Amelia, lots of words in there, and I think we would all echo the commitment that we've seen from Welsh Government in terms of the funding that it's put in, and certainly the focus that the Minister has brought to this. I know I certainly welcome that myself. Okay, thank you. So Joy, it's you. You're up next, our last speaker for this session. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you, Shane. Yeah, well, I feel like I could just say like what they said. Yeah, so absolutely, just background. So yeah, Joy Counts here as in my role as chair of Clwyd Community Housing Group, which is a small community association working within the RCT local authority area. 20 years plus now working in and around housing, homelessness, support and equalities, and a number of board positions over that time. So and also in terms of like where I'm coming from today, since being self-employed, I do a lot of work still in this area. So I think once you're in housing, homelessness, that kind of area, you can't, it's very difficult to go away. There's a, you know, it gets under your skin. So so it's a real honour really to be chair of a housing association, and it's a huge responsibility. So I wouldn't want to, obviously we've only just seen the report from Shelter and the model, and I wouldn't be the right person to comment on the detail in there. But I just wanted to talk from the aspects of principles and thinking of it from a board perspective. So I would absolutely endorse the principles that Paul outlined. And from a board perspective, I think that point about culture is really fundamental, because the culture of any organisation starts with the board. And it kind of, I think this is psychologically informed, trauma informed, the ACEs, all that kind of work has been part of our world for a while now. And I think I'm kind of always split in two on this, because on the one hand, I'm really pleased that that kind of approach is being taken, and on the other, it really saddens me that we have to come, that that's not just automatic, that we don't understand that actually being human and understanding people and trying to understand why people might be in this, you know, sort of behaving in the way that they behave. It kind of like is, you know, it just feels like, how would we need to tell people to behave in that way? Why do we need to tell services that that's how you have to respond? You know, it still saddens me that we need to do that, because so I don't know, I'll come back to why that might be, but as a board, I think first off, it is about role modeling that behavior. So, and I think it's really, you know, you can be on a board and you can sort of turn up and you can attend meetings and you can put in your 2 pence, but actually to do the job really, really well, I think is a real really difficult balancing act to get it right, because your role is to set that culture. Your role is to make sure that the organisation is financially stable. You have responsibilities to the people who work for the organisation, and you have responsibilities towards the people who are using the services of that organisation. So it's a huge balancing act, and it's also, you know, these things are done in your name. You're a trustee or a director. Whatever the organisation does is being done in your name, but you are the furthest removed from what's actually happening in when that organisation connects with other organisations or connects with tenants or service users or whatever. So it is, I think it is really tricky. But we at Clwyd, we had a conversation, and I probably about a year ago, I can't remember, last year anyway, where we were reviewing our whole approach, how we support people and how we respond, how we deal with evictions. And we have really changed in terms of the information that we receive, and how it's incorporated into our governance arrangements. We have really strengthened that, I think, over the last year. But I also think culturally it was really important for us to when we redrafted the policy, we said that any is a failure on our part. We see it as an organisational failure. And I think that was possibly quite a hard thing for people to hear, but from a board, that's what we see it as, you know, because everybody who got involved, who's a board member of Cynnon Taff, got involved because they have a commitment to the area, and they want to provide homes for people. They want to provide housing for people. So actually, if anyone is evicted by the organisation, that's done in our name, and it's the opposite of the reason for why we got involved in the first time voluntarily to an organisation. It's the opposite of what we want to achieve. So I think that culturally, that statement is incredibly important. And taking that approach is really, really important. I've been really, really impressed, for example, with the work that Clwyd Alyn have been doing. And I think, again, you know, being very, very clear from the leadership what the purpose of the organisation is. And I think for us, that's something that that's what we need to be really clear about, and we need to get that across to the people who work for the organisation. And we, you know, to the partners that we work with. So I wanted to just say that. I also think the way that boards, who they attract, who they recruit as board members is really, really important as well. And I think there has been a push. It's kind of said in the name of professionalising boards, which I really don't like, because it's kind of like, oh, we've got to have finance people and lawyers and architects and people like that. And I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I also think, you know, we still have a commitment to having tenants. When we recruited for our board a couple of years ago, we had quite a big recruitment drive. It was about values. It was about people, you know, it wasn't, we did obviously want people with different skill set, but the starting point was about values and the reason why they wanted to be on the board. Which was because they all recognised that having a home was you know, crucial, and they wanted to help make that happen. So I think that's again where a board comes into this. The other thing that I just wanted to pick up on was yeah, just to say a little bit more about that challenge, because as a board member, you know, it's about your responsibility towards the community, it's about your responsibility towards the staff, as well as the finances and everything else. And I think it is a challenge for us to get that right. And we won't always get it right, but we are trying to balance all those different things all the time. And it's amazing, you know, the pandemic obviously has been horrendous and continues to be, and has sort of presented huge challenges for people. But I think it has, as I think Amelia and Cheryl sort of touched on, I think it has really made the different parts of the jigsaw, homelessness services, housing services, local authorities, we've come together in a way, and some of the work I've been doing in consultancy, I've worked with different organisations around what we want to take from this experience, what we've learnt about ourselves as organisations, what we've learnt about what works. And everybody that I've spoken to, and I've done probably nearly about 100 different interviews now with different organisations around this, everybody says that we've worked together in a way with a clear goal, and people have moved away from that very prescriptive, this is the policy, so this is the way we do it, even though we know that it's not in the best interest of the person. This is what we've got written down, so this is the route that we have to follow. I think so many people have stopped doing it that way, and they've been focused on how do we get people in, how do we make sure that people have a home, and what do we need to do for this individual. And I so hope that we keep that going. So it's, yeah, I absolutely agree with the principles there about that, you know, let's do what's right for the person, and be flexible about that. And I just finally just wanted to say that part of my commitment to this sector and my interest in housing was because when I was sort of 17, 18, at 18, my first home was a housing association flat, and I'd gone through some really difficult times. Both my parents had died within like when I was 11, when I was 17, I was mixing with people who perhaps it wasn't the wisest choice. And that flat was, I was a nightmare tenant, I think, for the people around me, and I wasn't paying my rent on time and all the rest of it. If we'd had a punitive response, if that landlord had been on the ball, and and if ASBs had been around then, I'm sure I would have been the recipient of a very punitive response. And I think my life would have been incredibly different if that had happened, because almost like in the absence of a hands-on landlord, in a way, I managed to get my life together. But maybe that's why I don't understand how some people don't understand why a punitive response is not the right response. I had a lot on my plate, and I had a lot of things which were much more important for me to be dealing with than some of the things that might have been important to the landlord. So I just think, we got to do the right thing by people. Boards are about setting that culture. We need to be human beings with the staff if we want the staff to be human beings with other people. And yeah, I would absolutely endorse that. Let's be flexible, but I wish we didn't have to come up with technical terminology for being human. Why can't we just be human with each other and understand with each other? And if we did that, that would be great. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Jen. And Joy, I think that's a great set of words to finish on, of why can't we take a more human approach, which I think actually does the point you've made lots about culture, but underpin the report of asking for a more human approach. And during the evaluation of the report, and from Clwyd, Alyn and Wales and West, ourselves being involved, there ended up being 3 words that we sort of talked about. And one was you're needing to start with support, and that to be very early. You need to be incredibly persistent. And perhaps the most important, you needed lots of forbearance, because you just had to live with some things for a little while, and even quite a long while, if you were going to see this through and help people stay in their homes. I'd like to pick up, as I'm sure we'll have more questions coming in, but really to follow on that point that Joy's made and others made around culture. And Joy spoke very much from a culture being set by the board, but I wondered if there were others that wanted to come in of how we can ensure that that culture, if we're going to change things, pervades throughout an organisation. And that goes from the housing staff that are involved all the way up through managers, as well as boards as well. Joy spoke of the change that her organisation has made. I wonder if we feel that that's there across the sector, and particularly in local authorities, which you don't have a board, so there is a very different culture. I wonder if any of our panel members would like to comment on how we can change that culture, because I think that is so important if we're really going to see the sort of models that Jenny has talked about prevail.
Yeah, Shane, I'll come in there. I think it is a really important thing, and culture in local authorities, as we know, can vary across many local authorities. But I think, as Joy has mentioned, it starts with leadership. It starts with the direction from the top down, and I think that's a really important thing. Also, I think working in partnership helps enormously. I think you can get quite isolated sometimes in local authorities, thinking it's all about you. And I think the more you work in partnership, and the more you understand your relationship with others, and how you all are working to the same end goal to deliver that person-centered approach, is really, really important. I can do away with training. I know personally from training that we've undertaken, that's had a massive impact on staff. Just understanding, how they present to others, I think, is a really important thing. So I do think that, the trauma-informed training that we've talked about, I know many of us have done various ACE type models, but I do think we do need to keep delivering the trauma-informed training, because it is so fundamental to understanding sometimes why people do what they do, and I don't think we can ever forget that, really. So for me, it is about leadership, it's about management. It's, we haven't got a significant board like sort of RSLs, but we've very much got senior leadership teams, we've got chief executives who can send out that message. That's something that, well, we try to do in RCT. I don't know if we always do it very well, but I know the culture here is very much around, you know, the person-centered approach and understanding the individual. Yes, sometimes I have to admit that can get a little bit lost, but that certainly is the direction of travel that we would want to take, and to do that in partnership with everybody else around us, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. That's something you want to come back on, Amelia, thinking of culture and that leadership coming from Welsh Government as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that leadership is incredibly important, and I do think the Minister has really set out a really clear agenda, and I do think that's been important. And then I think for organisations, that being articulated really, really clearly and then cascaded throughout the organisation, so that it doesn't feel just like warm words, but it actually drives that change. And I guess people are held sort of accountable, but I really want to pick up on the other point also about how we treat our staff. So years ago, the Equality and Human Rights Commission did a human rights inquiry, and that came through really importantly, that if we treat our staff with dignity and respect, they're much more likely then to embed that culture and how they treat others and their tenants. Tenants' voice, massively important. And just to share with you, we've done loads of work in Welsh Government recently on our race. And the thing that's made the most difference to staff is hearing the personal experiences of Black, Asian and minority ethnic people and the barriers they faced, and hearing them talk about that has been really quite transformational.
Thank you. I don't know if you wanted to come back in as well, Jenny, on that, thinking of the report and the research around the cultural piece.
I think we've been thinking about culture change throughout this process at Shelter Cymru, and I think part of it happens collectively because the sector there's a narrative that drives how we think about how we're performing and how other providers are performing and how we're working as a nation. So I think change is happening. We can see it happening all around us, and that has a certain momentum of its own. But I think picking up on the question that David raised in the Q&A, the challenge about making this a holistic approach in all areas, it's so difficult when I think especially local authority services. And we so sympathise with this at Shelter Cymru, when you're so busy on an operational level and on the day-to-day, how do you take that step back and think across different services and different providers? It is difficult, and I think making the conditions, and so that's what we've tried really hard to do in the model, is to show where those conditions need to be favourable, and that can only happen with investment and the right legislation and the right shared responsibilities to prevent and end homelessness.
Thank you. I was very mindful in the report and when we went through the research of that sort of multi-agency approach, and I wonder if a number of you could comment on how much you think the success depends on other agencies outside of the housing sector to make homeless prevention a priority and for those models to work. Perhaps Jenny, you could start with saying a few things on that. On
the multi-agency approach.
How much you think success in preventing homeless depends on agencies outside of the housing sector directly?
Well, it's incredibly important, and I think you can see that in casework. If you're know what the real issue is, that they can't access mental health services, for example. You can't provide those mental health services as the landlord, can you? And you shouldn't. That's not what your role is. So it's absolutely vital, and we know it's not easy. But I think some of the models in the report, which you'll see that there's one in Monmouthshire, for example, and the one in Sedgemoor, have got some pretty good multi-agency buy-in, and and I think it's worth sort of unpicking how they got that buy-in from, like, social services, for example, really difficult to engage with, and yet you've absolutely got to have them at the table. So there's work to be done, but I think while homelessness is seen as a housing issue, we're going to have limited success in getting everyone around that table.
Yeah, I wonder, Karen, if you could comment on, because I got the sense that your project has tackled some of that, of making sure that other agencies are at the table. And I'm sure that was challenging, but perhaps you could comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have had a lot of success with engaging statutory agencies and other agencies. I think a lot of it is, exactly as you said, it is about culture change, absolutely. I think within Pobl, when we talk about a person-centred approach, we talk about that for our customers, we talk about that for our colleagues, but we also talk about that with other agencies as well. And when you're working, so I suppose for me, when you're working with a family and there's a lot going on around there, and you can evidence to other agencies that actually that support we're giving that family is also supporting that agency. And if there's, we call our own multi-agency meetings, we don't wait for statutory agencies to call that meeting. If we think there's an issue, we call everybody together, and those meetings, the aim is always to ensure that that family is getting the best support they possibly can from everybody involved.
I think there's lots of us that would be very interested to learn how you managed to get them to turn up to those meetings that you've called, Karen. That would be interesting. Joy, I know, wants to come in on this as well.
Yeah, it's not coming from a Canon Taft perspective, but from conversations through some work I was doing recently with the support part of an association. The tenants, one of the families that they were supporting, the mother came home and found her teenage son trying to hang himself. And when they contacted the mental health team, the only support the mental health team were able to give was to advise her to remove any objects, you know, belts, ropes, anything in the house that he could use. And that was capacity they had. That was the only thing they could do to help. And I remember when I was young and we had a social worker, and, you know, I remember the sort of support that we were offered was just not, you know, what we needed. And I just think it really saddens me that that stuff still goes on, and those sort of those services are so overstretched that that's the only thing that they can do. So absolutely, it has to come from elsewhere. And it's amazing that, you know, that the Minister has put the resources in to support. But if we don't get those other services, particularly when we look to what's going to be, you know, the predicted sort of psychological impact of the pandemic, and we're yet to see that, you know, the impact of the economic downturn because of, you know, further. But if there isn't a huge investment in those services, you know, there's not, housing and support on its own is not going to be able to deal with all those things.
I'm going to bring Amelia in a minute, but I think one of the challenges that we often face is just helping our residents access those services, because they all have lots of eligibility criteria, lots of other things that often effectively prevent access, and so do make that multidisciplinary working much more difficult, as has been put in the chat. Perhaps you'd like to come in, Amelia?
Yes, I put some stuff in the chat about there are some parts. Public service boards, RPBs. I'm not saying they're perfect, and I sit on Newport's PSB, but I do think there's still a heck of a lot of potential for developing those. I do wonder whether post-COVID there'll be more opportunity for co-location between public services and third sector services. It just helps cement relationships. It's more accessible to the public. But also I think education's absolutely key. So working in collaboration with education, so we're sort of getting the messages across to young people whilst they're still in school, and FEHE. And then just another thought is, which we found really helpful in Welsh Government, is convents in and out of organisations. I just think all of that helps us build the understanding of one another. I'm not for 1 minute saying that one of the problems isn't the huge pressure services are under, and finding the time, but it's just so important in the long run, will save us all so much time and money, and most importantly of all, the trauma for individuals.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Can I pick up a couple of the points that Cheryl made earlier? One of those was about allocations, and it certainly came up in the research, the issue around allocations, and almost if people are in the wrong home to start off with, then very difficult to sustain that tenancy, and helping people get the right home so that they can have a good life as they go forward. I don't know if anybody wanted to pick up particularly on that point. Because there's often a barrier with allocations, one from a local authority, sort of 1 or 2 strikes and you're out and you're off the list and you have a lower priority, or within organisations that we've got to let very quickly. And so lots of pressures compound that issue, or in danger of compounding that issue. I wonder if anybody wants to comment on that. Jenny, you have your hand up.
I'm happy to come in on that. So yeah, we've done some interesting, sorry, that's the moment my dog decides to start we've done some interesting work on allocations over the last few years, and I would direct people to Paul's report on the allocation system in Swansea. We also did a good practice guide around former tenancy arrears. So picking up, Cheryl, your point about a few £100 sometimes keeping people out of social housing, and that being an example of a rigid policy. I think the whole rapid rehousing transformation poses some really interesting questions for us in terms of allocations, and we're not there yet, clearly. So how do you get the right allocation without it taking up loads of time, and also understanding that everybody can make a success of their tenancy if they've got the right support in place? So we need to kind of erase that phrase tenancy ready out of our vocabulary, and that's not an overnight process, but to be tenancy supported instead. But also getting that balance about the right tenancy for them is I think there's a lot of interesting stuff we can do in allocations in years to come.
Thank you, Jenny. And your Jack Russell. Does anybody else want to come in? Cheryl?
Yeah, sorry, Shane, I was just going to add to that. Yeah, I mean, I think this comes back to culture as well, doesn't it? You know, we seem very rigid on if you've done this, that you can't move forward within an allocation scheme. So I do think it is a little bit of a challenge, but I do think that we are making progress. It might not be fast enough for some of us, but it is progress, and certainly housing first. If you've piloted that within your area, it has certainly demonstrated that, you know, despite owing, you know, quite significant arrears, that given the right opportunities, you can sustain a tenancy and make it work. So I think watch this space on this one, because I think it's still not just a cultural issue for local authorities, it's also for ourselves as well. And I think that's probably something that we need to work on as we go forward. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl. Did anyone else want to come in response to the issue on allocations?
Yeah, I think, you know, we've seen a huge increase in young people at the moment with complex needs. I think for me, it's going back to what we were saying here about ensuring people have the correct tenancy and the correct support, but that has to start early on. Exactly what you were saying, Joy, about how easily it is for young people to, you know, I think some areas have got it really right, where, you know, social services are working with housing, they have got the correct support in place, but that is few and far between. I think if you can get those tenancies and no support right at the very beginning, they stand more chance when they're older.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. Amelia?
Shane, I was just going to add that I think it really requires a sort of whole system approach and looking at it all. So we've got Shelter's work on allocations, we've got the recent report on priority need, and certainly that's what some of the advice we'll be giving to the future administration, is taking a real sort of root and branch look at the whole system.
If I can, sorry, Paul.
Yeah, just to endorse that, I did some work last year for CIH on this, and again was surprised at how different it was all across Wales, and how in some areas it's still incredibly bureaucratic and challenging to get through the door. And yeah, again, it goes back to those principles about let's be a bit more person-centered, let's be a bit more flexible, you know, the paperwork involved, or which may well be online now, but you know, some of it was incredibly bureaucratic, and I also think that we're trying to achieve too many things through one route, and that we need to have, as Amina said about that kind of almost like, I think we need a complete rethink about what housing we are providing, what routes into housing we're providing, for whom, and you know, I just think we're trying to do too much with quite with one product, you know, social housing for rent, and we're trying to meet all these different needs with it. You know, people with different needs and who want different things, and because we're trying to do so much with one product, we're ending up kind of really rationing it through the allocation system. Whereas I think if we kind of stood back from this and actually thought more about what the different people at different points in their lives might want, we could come up with something that just doesn't feel quite so antiquated and out of sync with where our lives are.
Thanks, Joy. Paul, you put your hand up to come in.
Yeah, that's true. The work that I did on the allocation of social housing in Swansea, it made me reflect actually that if you're looking to rent a private flat or buy a private flat, you can look at 10 or 20 and then you decide the one that you want. And some of the very restrictive policies around the number of offers you can receive, and then if you don't accept a reasonable offer, you're penalised. You might not be able to reapply for 6 months. You know. And something else I wanted to say was we do have to be careful of taking a holistic approach to this of any unintended consequences. So, for example, you know, ending evictions or ending homelessness from social housing is what we're working towards, but we mustn't allow that to inform an allocation policy where we're perhaps a bit less willing to take people who might potentially be more difficult as tenants, if you like, and who may become homeless. So we do have to take a rounded view of different policies that we're working towards.
I think that's a really good point that Paul's made at the end, and perhaps others can comment on as perhaps our last question for the panel, which is, can you think of any unintended consequences of ending homelessness from social housing? On the face of it, it's absolutely brilliant, but as Paul's potentially identified, one of those consequences might be how people choose people in the first place. Can we think of any other unintended consequences that might happen or happen that we'd want to be aware of and careful about? That was a good question because nobody answered it.
Well, another unintended consequence could be, of course, that this is a minor one to a degree, but less people will lose their social homes. And so there won't be as many social homes available to relet potentially. So a call for even more social housing.
Joy?
Yeah, I just think it goes back to that. We have responsibility to the person who, you know, the person who potentially is threatened with eviction, and we also have a responsibility to the people, to the neighbours, to the people living in the community as well. And I'm not, hopefully, obviously, not an advocate of just moving people around and, you know, and not dealing with the issue. But I think, you know, if we don't, it has to be about support. It has to be about support and compassion and understanding. You know, and all the work that kind of Karen's doing and other organisations are doing, because, you know, if we don't invest in that, then the unintended consequences that we don't deal with that, and it's the neighbours, it's the community who carry the brunt of that if we're not actually supporting the person. And I'm thinking, you know, obviously there's the county lines issues now and how we deal with that, because I have seen that people, you know, some organisations dealing with that through eviction, and again I just think, you know, that's not helping that individual, and it's just moving the issues around. And you know, when somebody's in that kind of position of being used by other people, the last thing they need is somebody else coming in and kind of like them losing their home. But I've also seen the impact it has on the people who are living around that individual who's being victimised. So, you know, it is about resources, it is about investment, it is about being human. But as Karen's project shows, that's not a quick, easy, cheap fix. That's intervention in a big way. So it you know, as ever, it does come back to resources.
Yeah. Thank you, Jenny.
I fully agree that it's, you know, one of the unintended consequences is that we end up moving people around. And sometimes people do have to be moved for the community as a whole and for that person themselves. But how do you do that in a way that is sustainable, I guess? And so one of my worries in all of this is that, and that's why we've been quite risk averse around the managed moves, because we didn't want to say that this is the answer, you can just move people, because, you know, without dealing with the fundamental reasons why the first tenancy failed, you're not necessarily, and we were very concerned about people ending up shoved into the PRS, for example, having enough say in the process. But I think this is a good point for me to give a little plug to independent advice, because we haven't worked it into the model in various stages. Not that we're touting for business, because we are quite busy at the moment already anyway. But I've been struck by talking to some of our caseworkers and hearing how they sometimes work with their clients, and we are representing the client's interests, but we're telling the client what their best interests are as well. And some of our caseworkers actually have sat down and had a good solid talk with the tenant, you know, about the choices that they're making, and that they need to, you know, and about the route which is best for them moving forward. So I think ensuring that independent advice and bringing in that outside view into what's best for the tenant. Providers can shy away from that, thinking you're going to end up with a headache of an advocate, and sometimes that might happen. But it also might be the catalyst for that tenant actually listening to someone when they're not necessarily going to listen to the representative of the landlord.
Sorry, can I just come in there, Shane, as well? I think just picking up what Joy and Jenny have said is, you know, when we talk about certain individuals, we are talking, particularly with his ASB, sort of quite challenging and high support needs. And what I think we can't allow to happen either is to allow adult social care and to get off the hook by just thinking, oh, well, they can stay there then. I think it's really important where there are specific needs that there is, as you say, that multi-agency response, and we deal with the outcome, even if it does mean that they leave that accommodation, but it's not eviction. So I hope we don't get to the stage where, you know, other providers see, oh, well, they can stay there then, because we already know that happens now, that people are just left in circumstances that they shouldn't be. So I just think that's quite important, that we don't allow other people off the hook as part of this process.
Well, thank you for that, Cheryl. As the final word from our panel, because we've reached the end of our webinar. So thank you to the panel. I think it's been a really good debate on the back of what I also believe is an excellent report. It does mean that there is lots to consider. It is complex. We've highlighted that in the Q&A session. There's quite a few comments around the issue around allocations. So it is complex. But I think as the privilege of being the chair and the last word is that this is also achievable, that this is not a holy grail that we're never going to find. But I think the examples of a number of organisations, Clwyd, Alyn and ourselves, is that you can actually achieve significant reductions in evictions into homelessness, and we can genuinely move towards that being zero. I really believe that to be true, and hope that this report highlights a set of models of how we can get there. So that's us for the day. A final plug, Jenny's done her plug for Shelter Cymru, but the Shelter Cymru people are on 7th and 8th of July, and you really do need to get your tickets now because they're selling fast. So thank you very much to everybody. Thank you for this afternoon, and farewell.